So, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode on philosophy of education. Now, we have already seen the four theories of learning, that is, the associationist theory, the constructivism learning theory, problem solving theory, as well as connectionism learning theory. Now it's time to compare these theories to see what are some of the positives, how can we actually use them in teaching and making education a good learning experience. So therefore today we will compare and contrast the four learning theories: associationist theory, constructivism, problem solving theory, and connectionism. At the same time, we'll also focus on their different views of learner's role, the whole process of learning, as well as the teacher's role. At the same time, we will also discuss the strengths and limitations of each theory in the context of modern education practices. So, first, let's take a look at the learner's role. So, when we speak of the learner's role, and when we take a look at the associationist theory, we see that the learner is passive. He is responding only to external stimuli. So, here learning is seen as a process of forming associations between stimuli and responses through repetition and reinforcement. And here we see that the learner's role is to absorb information and to reinforce connections through practice. For example, a student learning multiplication tables through rote memorization is mainly absorbing information that is presented to him or her by the teacher. Next, when we take a look at the learner's role in constructivism, we see that the learner is an active participant. Here, the learner is constructing their own understanding as well as knowledge through experiences. At the same time, there is also a lot of reflection that goes in. And here we see that learning here is a dynamic process. Why? Because we see that the learner builds on the existing knowledge and adapts to new information. For example, a student who is engaged in a science project is actively exploring, experimenting, and reflecting on the findings that they get. And in this way, we see that by reflecting, by experimenting, they are constructing their own understanding of those scientific concepts. When you look at the problem solving theory, here we see that the learner is a critical thinker. and here he engages in reflective thinking to solve problems. So, learning is seen as a process of identifying problems, at the same time analyzing them, and also finding solutions. And the learner actively engages with the material and also applies the knowledge to real world situations. For example, a student who is working on a case study in a business class will analyze data. He will also look at various solutions, various scenarios, and he will be able to apply his theoretical knowledge to propose a strategy to overcome certain problems. Then you have the learner's role when it comes to connectionism. So here we see that the learner's role, or the learner plays a role in forming connection between the stimuli and the responses through trial and error. And learning is a process of gradually strengthening the correct responses through reinforcement and repetition. So here we see that a child learning to play a musical instrument will practice various scales repeatedly, and thus will be able to strengthen the neural connections that are required to perform or play that instrument well. Next, let's take a look at the process of learning in all of these theories. So, when we look at the associationist theory, we see that learning here basically occurs through formation of associations between the stimuli and the responses. And here it relies heavily on the principles of contiguity, frequency, and similarity. For example, a repeated exposure to vocabulary words and their definitions strengthens the association between the word and the meaning, and this is particularly useful when we are learning a new language. When we look at the process of learning in constructivism, here we see that learning basically is a process of constructing knowledge through interaction with the environment and others. And this basically involves active exploration, reflection, plus integration of new experiences with prior knowledge. For example, in a history class, we see that students might engage in role play activity where they are able to stimulate historical events, and this basically allows them to construct a deeper understanding of the motivations and the consequences of those events that took place in history. Next, when we look at the problem solving theory, we see that here learning basically involves recognizing problems. At the same time, you also have to analyze them and also formulate solutions. And here we see that there is an emphasis on critical thinking, reasoning, and application of knowledge to solve the problems in the real world. For example, in a mathematics class, students might be given a complex word problem that requires them to apply various mathematical concepts in order to arrive at a solution. And finally, when it comes to connectionism, we see that here learning occurs through trial and error, with successful responses being reinforced over time. So, here it is a gradual process of forming connections between the stimuli and the responses through repeated practice. So, we see that a student learning to type would use trial and error to find the most efficient finger placement on the keyboard, and therefore gradually they become faster and more accurate depending on the number of hours they put in for practice. Next, let us take a look at the role of the teacher. So, when it comes to the associationist theory, we see that the teacher is the primary source of knowledge. And the teacher is responsible for providing the stimuli that lead to the desired responses. So, the teacher's role is to structure the learning environment. The teacher also has to present material that would lead to formation of correct associations, and the teacher also has to provide reinforcements. For example, a teacher would in a way keep on asking students to spell words using repetition and immediate correction to reinforce correct spellings. So every time the teacher tells them to write the spellings, the teacher corrects it immediately, and in this way we see that the students are able to learn to spell the words without any error. When it comes to constructivism, Here we see that the teacher's role is that of a facilitator. And therefore, teacher is the one who will guide the learning process. At the same time, the teacher also is the one who provides opportunities for exploration and discovery. And therefore, the teacher supports the students in constructing their own knowledge rather than just transmitting information to the students. For example, in a project based environment, the teacher provides the resources, asks the guiding questions, and encourages the students to collaborate and, in a way, reflect on their findings. When we look at the problem solving theory, we see that the teacher is a mentor. And here the teacher encourages critical thinking. As well as problem solving. Now, the teacher's role is to present problems, to guide the analysis, and also support the students in applying their knowledge. And then when we come to an example of this, we can see that in a debate class, the teacher will present a controversial topic. At the same time, the teacher will help the students to break down the arguments, and the teacher will guide the students in formulating and defending their positions. When we look at connectionism, here we see that the teacher is responsible for creating a learning environment that promotes trial and error. So here the teacher reinforces the correct responses and also provides feedback. So the teacher designs practice opportunities that also help the students to strengthen the desired connections. For example, a teacher uses behaviorist approach in the classroom management, and in this way reinforces positive behaviors with rewards and discourages negative behaviors with consequences. Now let's take a look at the strengths and the weaknesses of each of these theories. So when it comes to the associationist theory, we see that one of the strengths is that it is effective for basic skill acquisition and rote learning. It can be easily implemented in structured environments such as drills and memorization tasks, and it is useful for tasks that require repeated practice and reinforcement. When we look at some of the weaknesses, we see that it lacks focus on deep understanding and critical thinking. It may not foster creativity or the ability to apply knowledge in new contexts. And there's an overemphasis on the role of repetition, and as a result, this neglects meaning making in learning. That means you are only stuck with producing the same thing that has been given to you, rather than learning things, rather than applying things for yourself. When it comes to constructivism, one of the strengths is that it promotes deep understanding, critical thinking, and the ability to apply knowledge in various contexts. It also encourages active engagement, creativity, and collaboration. And in this way, it supports personalized learning where students build on their prior knowledge and experiences. When it comes to the weaknesses, we see that it can be challenging to implement constructivism as a theory in large, diverse classrooms where students have different levels of prior knowledge. So we see in the classroom, not everybody is at the same level. You have students who are below average, who are average, as well as above average. And therefore, the teacher needs to maintain a balance. The teacher just cannot only cater to one section of the people. And therefore, we see that constructivism requires significant teacher expertise. The teacher needs to be well experienced. The teacher needs to be well trained in facilitating and guiding the whole learning process. And at the same time, we see that this process is quite time consuming, as students need a lot of time and opportunities for exploration and reflection. So by providing group discussions, by providing them to go explore, find out information by themselves, does take a lot of time. And therefore, in a situation where you have to complete the syllabus, this could be one of the major challenges. When it comes to the problem solving theory, we see that one of the strengths is that it encourages critical thinking, reasoning, and problem solving skills. We see that this is very important in today's world where there's a lot of misinformation. It is important that we learn and we teach others to think critically. Also, we see that application to real world situations is something that is a key point of problem solving theory, and this makes learning relevant and meaningful. At the same time, we see it also fosters independence and the ability to approach problems creatively and strategically. The weaknesses, we see that it may be difficult for students who lack prior knowledge or experience in problem solving. So that means when you are placed in a particular situation, when you are supposed to solve a particular problem, you need to have some knowledge. You just cannot go there without knowing anything. So you need to know the background, you need to know how to solve those things. Only then can you really apply your knowledge in that particular situation. As a result, we see that this can be quite time intensive. It requires extended periods for analysis and solution development. We see that to analyze the situation, to come up with solutions, is not a very easy task. It does take a lot of time, a lot of effort. And therefore, we see that in an environment where you're compelled to complete the syllabus, this again could be another challenge. Next, we also see that this may not be suitable for all subjects or educational settings. Especially, we see that in an educational setting that is just kind of working towards creating students with degrees, this may not be suitable because we see that you need to have a bit of foundational knowledge before heading into problem solving theory. Coming to connectionism, we see that it is very effective for skill acquisition through practice and reinforcement. So anything that requires a lot of practice, that requires a lot of repetition, this connectionism learning theory is absolutely essential for it. We see that it also emphasizes the importance of feedback and reinforcement. We see that feedback plays a very important role in the learning process. It is only when you know where you are going wrong that you can sort of work on those ways and even change the ways. We see that it can also be used to shape behaviors and also develop automatic responses in learners, something what we call as reflexes. So you need not think every time. For example, when you have developed how to type quickly, you need not look at the keyboard. You just can feel the position of your fingers and you're able to type quickly. So that comes with a lot of practice, with a lot of repetition. Coming to the weaknesses, we see that there's an overemphasis on the role of trial and error, and this in a way may not always lead to a deep understanding. Secondly, we see that it may also neglect the cognitive processes involved in learning. So the students will not be thinking much, they'll be only focused on repeating what they have learned, and therefore connectionism is limited in its ability to explain more complex forms of learning that require high order thinking and reasoning. So this is the end of our comparison and contrasting of the four theories. Here are some questions that may help us to, in a way, reflect a bit more and come up with our own understanding of these four theories. First and foremost, how do different learning theories such as associationism and constructivism influence the teaching methods that educators might use in the classroom? Next, what are the key differences between the principles of associationism and those of problem-solving theory in terms of how learning is understood to occur? And finally, in what ways the limitations of associationist theory affect the effectiveness of educational practices that rely heavily on repetition and rote memorization. So that's it for this episode of learning theories. So next time around we'll take a look at some more learning theories, and in this way we'll try to find out which is the best possible approach that we can adopt. So till then, thank you and see you next time.